On Tuesday night, Victoria and David Beckham attended a state banquet in Buckingham Palace, where they mixed with the elite. King Charles hosted the Emir of Qatar, and the power couple was one of 170 people that attended the extravagant event. Because of his ties to Qatar, he served as a paid ambassador for the nation during the 2022 FIFA World Cup. David was invited to the exclusive event. Following procedure, the Beckhams were sat apart for the event, with David occupying the seat between Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the president of the Paris Saint-Germain PSG football team, and conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. Victoria was placed next to former Health Minister Lord Darcy of Denham and Labour peer Lord Levy. William, Prince of Wales, and Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, were also on the guest list. Queen Camilla attended King Charles, however Catherine, Princess of Wales, was conspicuously missing from the occasion. The monarch welcomed the emir and his spouse during the two-day state visit, saying, "In many ways, this evening might be seen as a homecoming. Your Highness is no stranger to these shores, having spent so much of your younger years at three of our most renowned institutions, Sherborne, Harrow, and the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst." He said, "Your many visits since then have served as a testament to the close personal ties that bind our nations and our families." The party's extravagant meal included a supreme of Windsor pheasant wrapped in Savoy cabbage, roasted celeriac puree, gratinated potatoes, truffle sauce, and a variety of winter vegetables. There was also a tartlet of Cornish lobster with quail eggs and organic salad leaves. Balmoral plum sorbet and organic Semon vanilla ice cream served as the meal's dessert. Guests were also handed a unique non-alcoholic drink dubbed the Royal Mirage, which was composed of ginger and smoked pomegranate with black lime, which is the color of the Qatari flag. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace glittered with golden chandeliers, casting soft light on the elegantly dressed guests below. It was the height of royal diplomacy, a state banquet in honor of the Emir of Qatar, and everyone who was anyone in British society had gathered to witness the spectacle. The long, polished table was adorned with crystal goblets and fine china, with plates so immaculate they looked like delicate works of art. At the head of the table, King Charles sat with an air of calm authority, his gaze sweeping across the room, acknowledging dignitaries and statesmen. Beside him sat the Emir of Qatar, a figure of poise and power, his ornate robes a contrast to the more understated yet equally formal attire of the British royal family. But it was not the royals or heads of state who had the most eyes on them that evening. No, that distinction went to the Beckhams, David and Victoria, the most famous celebrity couple in Britain. The power couple had been invited, as they often were, to represent the glittering world of celebrity at the palace. Yet tonight, there was something different. Something subtle but undeniable. The Beckhams, despite sitting in close proximity to the royal table, were separated. David, a football legend with a smile that could light up the room, was seated further down the table, placed between a Middle Eastern dignitary and an old family friend from the fashion world. Victoria, the Queen of British fashion, sat in a chair near the other end, flanked by influential politicians and a few other celebrities. It was an unusual arrangement. The Beckhams had in the past always been seated together at state events, almost as a symbol of their partnership. Their unity had become as much a part of their public image as their individual successes. But tonight, there was a subtle, unspoken distance between them. David's face, though charming as always, betrayed a flicker of discomfort. As he made polite conversation with the guests beside him, his eyes occasionally drifted toward Victoria. She sat with impeccable posture, her gaze focused, seemingly absorbed in a conversation with a royal aide. But there was a coolness in her demeanor that hinted at the complexity of their situation. The moment seemed charged with an invisible tension. David Beckham, the picture of poise and disquiet. David's life had always been in the public eye, he was used to it. From the soccer fields of Old Trafford to the glossy pages of magazine spreads, his every move had been scrutinized, dissected, admired, and criticized. Tonight, however, the eyes on him felt heavier than ever. He adjusted his cufflinks, the faintest sound of the metal clicking together, breaking the silence between him and the dignitary beside him. The man was speaking in rapid, excited tones about a recent business venture, but David's thoughts kept drifting. He was aware of the soft murmur of voices around him, the clinking of silverware, and the hum of distant chatter, but his mind kept circling back to Victoria. Had she noticed? Of course she had. How could she not? The seating arrangement hadn't been a coincidence. David knew that much. As they had both been pillars of British celebrity culture for over 2 decades, there were moments when even the most famous faces in the room felt the subtle pressure of expectations, of appearances, of something more than just a couple having dinner at a royal banquet. The last few months had been tough on them, on their marriage, on their public image. Rumors of tension, of distant moments, of private struggles, had begun to swirl. And though they'd both worked tirelessly to maintain their polished, flawless exterior, tonight felt different. Their distance was not just physical, it was something more elusive. As the conversation continued around him, David found himself distracted by the flicker of candlelight, reflected in the polished silverware before him. He caught glimpses of Victoria, as poised as ever, leaning slightly forward in her seat as the royal aide spoke. Her lips, painted in a shade of deep crimson, were pursed in concentration. It was the same Victoria who had dominated the fashion world for years. The same Victoria who had once stood beside him at every gala, every public appearance, smiling for the cameras. But something was missing tonight. Victoria Beckham, the weight of silence. Victoria sat with her hands folded delicately in her lap, a picture of grace and elegance. Yet beneath the composed surface, she was acutely aware of the change in the air. The usual warmth that existed between her and David seemed distant tonight, like a flickering candle that had been blown out. She wasn't sure how it had happened or why, but she could feel it, an unspoken rift that neither of them had yet addressed. The conversation she was engaged in was polite, professional, a required dance at such events. The aide spoke about a new charitable project she might be interested in, a potential collaboration between her fashion line and a foundation for underprivileged children. But Victoria's mind was elsewhere. She had known this banquet would be a challenge. It wasn't just the presence of the royals or the emir, it was the underlying currents of her own life, of her relationship with David, that felt unsettled. She glanced across the table. David was smiling, nodding, charming everyone around him. His charisma was effortless, and it had always been one of the reasons she had fallen for him. He was the golden boy, the international icon. And she had been by his side every step of the way. But now she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure what had changed, but there was a growing sense of disquiet that she couldn't shake. The press had been relentless, the rumors gnawing at the edges of their marriage. They had weathered many storms, but there was something different about this one. And here tonight, in this opulent room filled with world leaders and celebrities, the distance between them felt painfully real. King Charles and the Emir of Qatar, the silent observers. Meanwhile, at the head of the table, King Charles observed the scene with his usual poise, though his eyes occasionally flicked to the Beckhams, who had been invited for a very particular reason. Their presence was symbolic, a bridge between royalty, celebrity, and international diplomacy. Both David and Victoria were well-known figures in their own right, but it was their connection to the world stage that had made them invaluable. As King Charles exchanged pleasantries with the Emir of Qatar, he couldn't help but notice the subtle undertone of tension at the Beckhams' end of the table. The royals were masters of diplomacy, skilled at reading between the lines and sensing when things were amiss. And though neither David nor Victoria had uttered a word of disagreement, there was an unspoken discomfort in the air. The Emir, too, was a keen observer. He had seen many dignitaries over the years, and he was no stranger to the intricacies of personal relationships. His eyes, like those of the king, flicked toward the Beckhams from time to time, noting the unusual seating arrangement and the quiet, strained energy between them. But as always, he said nothing. Politics, after all, was about reading the room, and the room, tonight, seemed full of unsaid words. The evening unfolds. As the evening wore on, the meal was served, a grand array of delicacies, from perfectly roasted lamb to delicate pastries, each dish a work of art. The conversation flowed more easily now, aided by the wine and the convivial atmosphere of the grand banquet hall. Yet even as the crowd grew louder, the tension at the Beckhams' end of the table remained palpable. David and Victoria, still seated apart, exchanged fleeting glances, each one more loaded than the last. Their smiles were tight, their words polite but distant. The silent distance between them grew with each passing course, with each passing moment. At one point, as the dessert course was being served, David leaned slightly toward the dignitary beside him, trying to break the invisible barrier that had formed between him and Victoria. The dignitary was explaining something about Qatar's role in global trade, but David's thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't help but wonder if tonight was more than just an evening of formality. It felt like an evaluation, a moment of reckoning. Victoria, for her part, was absorbed in a conversation about an upcoming fashion show. Her voice was calm, her expressions composed, but the flicker of her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, spoke volumes. She had always been the one to maintain a perfect image, to steer her public persona with precision. But tonight, it felt like the weight of that image was growing heavier, as if every move, every glance, was being scrutinized. A moment of connection. As the evening drew to a close, there was a rare moment of connection. The final toast was made, and the guests rose from their seats, murmuring in appreciation for the magnificent evening. The Beckhams, standing at opposite ends of the room, found themselves drawn together by the sheer force of their shared history. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the room, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The distance that had existed all evening seemed to dissipate in that instant. Without a word, David moved,